Every leader has a strategy. Executing on that strategy is the challenge. If you want to learn how to effectively achieve what you've set out to accomplish, then this show is for you. Gain keen insights and listen in as leaders share their stories and challenges. SOAR Vision Group and the Baldrige Foundation welcome you to Leader Dialogue Radio.
Hi, everyone. I'm Duffy Dixon with Business RadioX. Thanks so much for joining us here on Leader Dialogue, brought to you by SOAR Vision Group and the Baldrige Foundation. Joining me is Jennifer Strahan. She is the Chief Operating Officer with SOAR, and also Lisa Council, who's the Chief Commercial Officer. We didn't rib our Commander-in-Chief, the CEO, who is Ben Sawyer, who usually joins us, but he is, where is he this time?
He's in Colorado.
Mm-hmm.
Talking about snowballs. Last week we were talking about snowballs, so he was traveling back from Colorado.
Although he did say it was like 70, I think, when he was over there, which I don't really think is fair, personally.
Yeah, I don't like that at all.
Colorado in March, 70.
Yeah, oh, now we know. Yeah, he was always going to fun places. We have to, hopefully he brings us back saying, not a snowball. No snowball. Yeah. Thanks so much for joining us again this week. If you listened in last week, we have one of our speakers back. He was excellent. His name is Lindel Fields, and I will just tell you, he has been with the County Tech organization for quite a while. He's the superintendent, but the really cool thing, I think, is that for 4 years now, he has been voted as Fortune's Great Places to Work. He's made the list 4 years in a row, and he also is a prestigious Malcolm Baldrige Award winner. And we've been picking his brain for great things. Last time we talked a lot about the power of an engaged workforce, and he has done amazing things to keep his workforce and manage to compel students and everyone else. So we're going to keep on that topic. Jennifer, you have a couple things that we call this the deep dive. So a few more questions for you, Lindel, and welcome.
Yes,
you bet.
Thanks
Thank
you. for calling back in, and we're excited to be able to talk with you again. We talked about a lot of things last week, and I feel like it was a really interesting conversation, especially relative to technical schools versus maybe more traditional higher education, and just the value that it brings. And in the midst of that, being able to really, to Duffy's point, engage your workforce to help bring that mission to life. Two things kind of stood out to me, but I'll start with one that you mentioned, which is really consistency is key. And so you said something where you mentioned not what you do in a day, but it's what you do daily. So it's not just about saying we do one thing or another, but it's actually about living and breathing it consistently every single day. And one example you gave was just proximity to leaders. And so one of the goals that we want to do in this show is really start to create some tangible takeaways for the audience so that they can hear some of those things and say, okay, well, how do I take that back to my organization? What can I do there? So any other thoughts when you shared, for instance, around communication was an example of consistency and being able to really focus in on the right communications, not just every communication. You started talking about Facebook Live.
Right. So, a lot of things come to mind in terms of proximity and communication. And I mentioned last week about how we were so proud that we had so many communication methods. And when you have so many, it confuses people, and it's kind of like the social media. Sometimes you can just get overwhelmed with all the communication. So for us, we have 3 simple forms of communication. We do a Monday coffee talk. It's the traditional Monday type memo with things you need to know, and primarily highlights people in our workforce who've earned what we call a white bison, and talks about activities on campus and so on and so forth. Those highlights are replicated when I do a Facebook Live or a Facebook video later in the week. And so it's a way for a leader to get in front of the workforce. It doesn't matter if you're in Colorado or New Zealand or Boston. Sometimes I get a kick out of people when they say, hey, I'm sorry I didn't call you back. I was out of town. I'm like, the internet doesn't work in Boston or Colorado. It works everywhere, so you can be anywhere in the world and be engaged with your workforce. So you do 5 minutes. Hey, gang, just wanted to let you know that at the board meeting last night, they approved the school calendar for next year. Well, it doesn't have to be anything staggering, just the basic information. And then we have a monthly superintendent's event, which is much like the town halls that we've talked about, but we do that consistently every month, where we recognize people for doing great things. We break bread together. Senior leaders give a really brief report, keyword brief report, and we celebrate for less than an hour once a month. And that right there does it. I do not send out company-wide emails. Nobody does. That email's kind of something we don't use.
Wow, no reply alls. That is crazy.
Right. So those are simple ways to communicate. But in terms of proximity, so the one thing that we talked about regarding Facebook is that gives people proximity to the leader. Albeit Facebook Live, it's very, very effective. So the proximity thing makes me think about a conversation I had with a young leader a few years ago, and they shared this idea for a new program, not at my school, but a different organization. I'm like, that is a fantastic idea. Have you shared that with your superintendent? And after a bit of a pause and an awkward look,
you knew the answer.
They said I would be more likely to get a meeting with Bigfoot.
Oh.
So, as sad as that is, a lot of people feel that way. We know that only, a small percentage of people are truly engaged in the workplace. It doesn't take a lot. They just want their voices to be heard, and it doesn't take lots of money or time to do that. So that's an example of proximity that comes to mind.
Lisa, you talked about town halls last time, and I think there's such a difference in what I would consider maybe a superficial town hall. We go out once a quarter or even less, and we're there and we're sharing everything that's going on, and it's really just a didactic approach or talk, and then you open it up for questions, and then your audience of 1,000 people, of course, you may have one brave soul that wants to stand up.
Of course.
But no, it's not two-way dialogue. It's not meaningful dialogue. So I love that you've actually identified intentional ways that people are honestly much more comfortable responding to and actually getting information, but also have a way to give information or respond to that information.
Right, exactly. The social media, people are more brave to post questions or enter into dialogue than they would if they were one of 1,000, in a town hall. And, if a town hall's all you got, gosh, by all means, do it. There's probably ways to engage the workforce versus, I think one of you mentioned didactic, sit and get kind of thing, where you could interact with employees, recognize employees for exhibiting values. There's a million ways to do that to make it more enjoyable for the workforce, to make them feel like they're really a part of the organization.
Well, I think that's key. It sounds like from our talk last week, again, not only are you engaging the workforce, but you're empowering them. So I've always heard, when I become silent, I've kind of checked out from the organization's mission, right? So, by your engagement and your empowerment, you really are. You're franchising your brand to all of your educators, right? They have a stake in the game.
Right. They do have stake in the game. And so I love how you said that, franchising your brand. I've never really thought about it that way, but when people are engaged, they become engaged because they know where you're headed. They know where you're going, and when they know where you're headed and where you're going, they can be part of that. And a couple things that we've done when the economy's kind of tanked is we've really just did an all call to the staff. Now we save these. These are very far and few between, but we do an all call to the staff for ideas. And then consistently we have a Bright Ideas program where individuals in the organization can submit ideas based upon our key core values or our key performance measures. And that gets people engaged too. On average, we have about 80 ideas submitted a year, with about 50% getting implemented. So
wow.
That's another way to get people involved in the organization.
Reading your bio too, one of your claims to fame, I know you talk to groups and things, is, instilling a love of learning in students. So I'm guessing that culture has to actually start with your teachers, with the people who work with you. Any tips on how you do that? And I think that could translate into other businesses. A love for, whatever it is you do.
Right, instilling a love for learning. Well, that does start with our teachers, but one of the other mantras, we've talked about a few of those, one of the other mantras is that if you're not taking care of the student, take care of someone who is. And for us, that was a silver bullet. And it could be, if you're not taking care of the patient, take care of someone who is. If you're not taking care of the customer, take care of someone who is. So the bus drivers, the maintenance people, the cafeteria people suddenly know that their job is to take care of the patient. For me as the CEO, I'm support staff. My job is to give the frontline staff the resources they need to be successful. So it reframes everything. And so you suddenly have more than teachers that understand that students are your priority. Now, it's important to note that, like most businesses, my school's a choice. Not a single kid has to come here, right? Not a traditional K-12 where you have to go compulsory education. So we have a business to run, right? And it's dependent upon us having customers in the building. So I don't think that's any different than, I say, Target, for example, right?
Right.
Their choice. And if they don't offer good customer service and a good product, they're not going to be in business. So I may have gotten off topic a little bit there, but I think
was perfect.
Maybe we're on the same page.
Yeah, that was perfect.
So one thing that comes to mind, focusing on workforce.
Right.
This is, you brought this up last time when you talked about TV reporters often get questioned around, how much do you make? And there are certain industries that probably are not millionaires walking around from the sake of the work that they've done, and teachers is one of those areas.
Right.
So you bring up, I think, a really good point that is not uncommon in, I would say, any organization, regardless, because every organization has different levels of types of positions, right? So one common pushback we hear from people is, well, they don't make enough to be engaged, or they're not engaged because of, XYZ, but often pay is an example of what that looks like. So talk a little bit about how you have been able to engage the culture, maybe not necessarily just from, I know we talked about like pay for performance, last week when we were connecting, but what other ways have you been able to really engage your workforce outside of just pay? Because that goes to the culture you're talking about.
Yeah, yeah. Like you talked last week. I mean, it's a starter.
Right. That has to be.
You have to have the pay there, but again, there are other value to your workforce. Right.
So, yeah, the pay and benefits, you have to pay the livable wage, and depending on what levels you look at, that it's different in different parts of the country, and give good benefits. In education, typically there's really good benefits, so that adds a lot too, and Tri-County's no exception. We have 50-some-odd paid days off, paid maternity leave, sick leave, child care, those kinds of things. So the benefits are really, really good too as an educator. But beyond that is people being able to give their talents to something bigger than themselves. And so when people have the opportunity to do that, they will be engaged. And I can't emphasize enough, we've already talked about this, when people know where the organization is going. The Major League Baseball team knows the goal is to win the World Series. So often you ask an organization, regardless of the type of industry, where's the organization going? What is the vision of the organization? And people simply don't know. So when you can paint that picture of where the organization's going, people can see how they fit into it. But then it comes down to leadership, providing opportunities. And the biggest challenge for me, if I may, is when you work in an organization, we do have an amazing culture, and my senior leaders, for example, have all been with us 20 years.
Wow.
I think our CFO's 15 years. So what do you do when you have rock stars? You can't have 80 vice presidents, right? You have to create meaningful work, and you have to create opportunities, and that leads to our formula for promotion. Everybody knows it at Tri-County. Do the job you have now better than anybody's ever done it, and good things will come your way. So that goes back to people have to work hard, have a good attitude, and good things will come their way. So engagement is just about letting them see the big picture, and when you ask for input, you listen, and if you can't implement it, then you say why, and if you can, then you celebrate.
I'm going to be a stand-in for Ben. So imagine Ben sitting here saying this, because I think he would be applauding you at what you're talking about, whereas you're getting the organization behind you. They have to know where you're going, what you're doing. There's a study that is, I think we've shared this on the show a couple times before, where if the study went in and they brought, I think, 6 different strategic plans, laid them out on a conference room. They were all redacted, so you couldn't know who. It didn't have any reference to the organization. And had middle managers walk in to see, and just had to find which of those 6 plans was their organization. So it was like a multiple choice, right? You just had to pick it up and identify it. And only 29% of leaders were able to actually identify their plan. And that was leadership. So that was people who really should know what is our strategic plan, and they couldn't identify it. So I completely agree with what you're saying. And you mentioned talent, like being able to support the talent. What are ways that you guys support your teachers and your team in engaging and continuing to develop their own talents?
Well, so individual development, we hold in high esteem professional development, and we call it unlimited professional development. So people can ask for leadership training or technical update training to improve their capacity, and we will approve it, and people will self-monitor. So the question is, it's really, people scratch their head and they're like, how do you pay for that, the CFO? Well, people are going to be reasonable about that. So we let them pick and choose, and people know themselves what they need to work on the best. We don't need leaders necessarily. I mean, sometimes you have to say, hey, I want you to work on a certain thing, but people self-identify. They develop their own professional development plans, and that just creates such a sense of trust. Oh, I get to pick my plan. But I have to tell you, when we eliminated a state mandate, I can't believe I just said that on the air, that we're going to eliminate professional development points. So for you, it might be go to this conference. For you, it might be to read this book, and I'm giving you simple examples. But it's whatever you need to be the best version of you, and whatever you submit, we're going to approve. So
that's amazing.
But with the first time we rolled that out, everybody's like, "Yay!" And then they're like, "Oh, I have to develop my own plan.
I have to be accountable."
It's harder than you think. So, that's a simple thing of just, leadership doesn't have to have all the answers. Just let other people do it.
Empowerment.
And they'll surprise you.
And that tells me, as an employee, you trust me. You trust my decisions. The same thing when he says he welcomes ideas and some of them get implemented. I mean, even if my idea doesn't get implemented, the fact that
you heard me
and my coworker, they did it. I mean, that goes so far.
Yeah, for sure.
It's so simple, but thinking about like the Marine mantra of, hua, so heard, understood, acknowledged. Even if it's not implemented, it's acknowledged, right? I understand. I'm taking the time to actually listen to you. I think that really helps drive that culture of what you're talking about.
I read an article early this year. It's still early this year, but in January, and it literally it talked about that. January of every year, 1/3 of every employee is shopping a job. Wow, right? Like that just kind of hit me that, 1/3 of your workforce during the beginning of the year, whenever your fiscal year begins, is looking for a new job. Tell us a little bit, Lindel, about kind of your organization. It sounds like your leaders have been there greater than 20 years. I mean, tell us about your retention of your workforce.
Well, you're so right. We hear, people that aren't engaged or people looking for jobs. The numbers are all over, but they're high. I suspect we have people that are looking for other opportunities. The pasture's always greener, but what's it say? It costs more to water sometimes. We've had a couple leave and come back, but by and large, our retention rate is 95%. Wow. So if you think about 100 employees, we lose 4 or 5 a year to other opportunities, or maybe a partner gets transferred. We still count it. We lost them, but if if we go over 10%, I would be concerned about my own viability. That would be concerning to us. So, and again, it just goes back to the culture of trust. And this sounds great, all of this stuff, and I know people are probably thinking, really? Can you be serious? But what we have to remind is this doesn't happen overnight. What is it? The best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The best is now. We had 2-day retreats where the KPMs would take us 2 days to hammer out key performance measures, and there's a lot of things that go into making the sausage, but pretty soon it does. It seems simple, but it just didn't happen overnight, right?
Well, and you just mentioned that you had a key leader in your political regime there in your state come and visit. How are you impacting, statewide your education system? And tell us how you're really going beyond just the bounds of your own organization.
Right. So, there is a lot of attention given to our organization. Oddly enough, a lot of it's coming from out of state. You can't be a prophet in your own land sometimes. But we are affecting. So we're having best practices conferences, and so since we accomplished Vision 2020, we rolled out Vision 2025, and our mantra behind Vision 2025 is to help other organizations become great places to work with world-class results. So we feel like It's time to give back with our leadership training. So we believe it's about leadership, and simply that's the law of the lid that comes from John Maxwell in the #1 leadership book of all time, the 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership. And the #1 law is the law of the lid. And our organization began to really blossom when we lifted the lid. We recognized that your organization can't grow beyond its own leadership capacity, and we had to grow our leadership capacity in order to grow our organization, and we began to invest in our people with time and money.
That's awesome.
You know what is the undercurrent of this whole conversation, which we've not really pulled out, and it's servant leadership, right? How do you make sure that everything you're doing is really serving your team, serving your customers, your students, your patients? And that, I think, is such a rare form. People talk about it, but to me, things you're talking about are just simple ways. I say simple, that's not necessarily the case. Some of these are more complicated and take time, but again, it's just the bread and butter of what you actually are doing. It's servant leadership.
And Lindel described himself the first time he said, talking about what he does, he said, I'm support staff.
Yeah.
Right.
And Lindel, I think I read on your website, again, you have all these little great anecdotes and sayings. Nobody really cares how much you know until they know how much you care, right? I think that is so transformational when you're really trying to bring people along and get them on the boat, right, and move in the same direction.
Yeah, without a doubt. Long gone are the days that you show up to work and you get paid a paycheck and the boss can live with that. From time to time we still see that, but those aren't successful organizations. And no, I think if you really want to do something significant in your organization, that's what you have to do. And I call it going southpaw. When Rocky learned how to box, his coach, you remember he had that left hook, he had a haymaker, and then that you want to start throwing a jab, and that's how you really win fights. But when you get hit in the head, you start throwing those haymakers again. Leaders know that being gracious and being giving opportunities to their people is the right thing to do, but then it gets a little uncomfortable and they go back old school. And so if you just stay the course, pretty soon you'll find out you can win the fight with those right hands.
It feels like you're being vulnerable. Like you said, to say for the person in charge to say, I don't know everything. That's huge. But I think the dividends pay off. I really do.
Well, I think to have trust, really bidirectional trust, both parties have to be vulnerable.
That's right.
Right.
Yeah.
Stephen Covey talks about that in I think it's Stephen M.R. the son. Covey talks about that, where you have to display and give trust before people will naturally see it as a leader. So it's exactly right.
Right.
One thing, if we can, just because I know we have a few minutes, and I want to kind of shift to a topic you talked about before, and you brought this up in our last week's show, where you mentioned less is more. And it reminded me of, we were privileged to talk with Jane Pope, who is CEO of Hill Country Memorial, also a Baldrige recipient, but that's a hospital. And one of the things that she said that I wrote down when she said it was, the more complex things get, the simpler we get. And in the midst of it, it's hard. The bigger of an organization you are, the more complicated your strategy gets, to really kind of step back and look at the bones of it. And you gave the example of the communication methods that you talked about both last week and this week. And it's hard to sometimes look at what you're doing to say, should we be doing all of these things? Are these all meaningful? Are these the right ways? Versus, can we really get down to the essence of the essential components? Can you talk a little bit about maybe that paradigm shift that you guys went through to get there?
Right. Our mantra, less is more, stick to the core, was just fitting for us because we talk about our core programs and services. But the mantra that really started with is, when you try to be everything to everybody, you can't be anything to anybody. And so when you're out here trying to do all this stuff, you simply can't do it. And I'll tell you the most profound Baldrige moment I've had, and that was in 2005, and I was in a breakout session at a Baldrige conference, the national conference, listening to Bronson Hospital. Had to come back to me. And in that breakout, the presenter was able to clearly articulate who they were, what they did, and how they did it. You're talking about a hospital with multiple campuses, thousands of employees, tens of thousands of customers, that were a lot like Hill Country, I'm guessing. They were able to clearly articulate to me who they were in such a way that I could understand it. And I'm like, aha, that's Baldrige. If we could ever get to a point where we could clearly articulate who we were, what we did, and how we did it in such a way that we could understand it and our customers, we will have arrived. We call it the Tri-County Way, but Baldrige is like learning to speak Spanish. All you know at first is how to say cerveza and taco, and then pretty soon,
Really,
right?
isn't that, Lindel, that's all you need.
Really?
Maybe
some
in
chips.
and maybe
Some
banyo.
chips. I
Got to
need
get to the
chips.
bathroom
Right.
too.
But pretty soon you understand the language. So, but for us, it was about getting rid of the baggage and having the courage to do it. And that hasn't stopped. We eliminated one of our biggest divisions in our school the year we won Baldrige, a 50-year division that was losing money. And we just knew it was the right thing to do. And so less is more, stick to the core. And what it did was bolster up the rest of our programs, made them stronger by eliminating a weak link.
It reminds me of Morton Hansen's book, Do Less Than Obsess. And he goes out and studies high-performing organizations, and he talks about exactly what you're saying, that organizations who are able, and it's a discipline and a hard discipline, but when you're able to identify what are your top things you're really going to be doing, and it can't be a top 50, but what are your top 2, top 3, then that's the organization that starts to actually step away from the curve and really excel.
Yeah, he used an example of Steve Jobs when he had a big team that was working on the iPad versus the ones working on the phone. And he was like, nope, we're going to do one, and we're going to do the phone, and we're going to do it really well. And all the people on the iPad team are like, wow, am I going to be without a job? Nope, we need you to focus. We need all your talent to do, less than obsess. But every time we go in front of leaders, Jennifer, we hear over and over and over, it's so difficult for leaders to pare down all the things that come at them.
Well, because you're choosing between good and good things.
Right.
A lot of times they're all good.
And some
then you have to make the list of, well, what's better and what's best.
Right. Exactly. I won't talk about, but I know we have obviously lots of distractions that can easily pop up, whether they're being navigated from the market and environmental changes, and sometimes regulatory, absolutely, or as some brave soul just mentioned, you can just throw those out the window. But just kidding. But making sure we know, hey, what are the right things to focus on, and is it we're not doing something because it's the right thing to do, right? We're not doing it for the sake of just rebelling. It's because this is tied to our mission. This is tied to what we need to be doing.
Right.
Exactly.
How often do you, Lindel, have to sort of have that conversation with others around you? How often do you have
Remind
to look
them.
at the look at the list and say less is more?
Or do they remind you?
Oh yeah, true.
Oh, you nailed it. So, yes, the senior staff aren't afraid to say fields. Less is more, stick to the core. And, yeah, they have to remind me, but we have the conversation. We have 2 retreats a year. And, if you're going to start somewhere, if you're an organization listening today, get off site, go break bread together, build your team, and work a little bit, and talk about what you need to do and not do. After we won Baldrige, 6 months later, we cataloged every single thing we do in our organization. We had more things than we have days in a year, days in our school year. And we began to look at that, and you would think we would have had that figured out, but it's a never-ending process. And like everybody else, we do stuff because we've always done it.
Yeah.
And we run our businesses like we run our lives sometimes. Brene Brown calls it, we wear this badge of honor, this busy badge of honor.
Yes.
We don't do that at Tri-County, and we don't say the word busy, and we try to not let distractions get in the way. And we talked about the people I coach. My job is to help them say no, right? Learn how to say no, because folks, the world's not thinking about us. When we say no, nobody cares, to be honest with you, and we have to learn how to do that. And when we do, it provides freedom in our lives with finances, but more importantly, our most important resource, and that's time. And the same is true in our organizations.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's awesome.
Well, this has flown by, but it's been really an exceptional conversation. And just to reiterate some of the key things we've talked about, I think for me, some of the takeaways I'm hearing, first and foremost, just show you care. Engage with your staff, connect with them, communicate in the right ways, be accessible. And the second thing that really stood out to me is just making a point to make your team's life easier and better in whatever way that means for them. Find ways to make it relevant to them and meaningful. And that, I think, aligns with the less is more, right? If we're not overwhelming staff with a million things to do, but rather just the right things to do. And that takes discipline, to your point, to say no to things, to be able to eliminate distractions. But when you're engaging that workforce, that's where it sounds like results are just going to start naturally coming as you have very focused ways that you're doing that. So thank you so much for joining us. It's been great.
Thank you for being on the show. I know Duffy's going to wrap us up. And also thank you for giving back, Lindel, you and your team, as you look at 2025 and really making other organizations great places to work. You could have been selfish and said, hey, I'm just going to continue to focus on our organization.
Right.
Thank you for not doing that.
Absolutely.
Thank you for saying so. We're having a lot of fun doing it, and it's really rewarding to be able to help other organizations. So thank you for saying so.
Well, continued success to you. We really appreciate you joining us. And thanks to everyone who listened to us here on Leader Dialogue, brought to you by the SOAR Vision Group and the Baldrige Foundation. On behalf of all of us at this table and our producer, Mike, we'd like to say join us again next week for Leader Dialogue here on Business RadioX.